What are your roommate horror stories? Let me start by saying I am handicapped, and when I am not in my wheelchair, I get myself around by scooting and crawling. I should also mention the roommates were my best friend for 10 plus years and her boyfriend. Before we moved in together, my roommates were talking about wanting to get a dog. No problem, I love animals. I did, however, request that they do not get a large dog because I feared it knocking me down or over when I am out of my wheelchair. I also lived in the basement of the house and worried that the dog may knock me down the steps when I scoot up to the kitchen. They ended up getting a pit bull. I have nothing but good things to say about the breed. However, it was a young dog that had not been spayed. She was hyper constantly, and they had to keep her from jumping on me all the time. They would barely take the dog out for walks because they're terrible, lazy pet owners. We had a deck that I keep my wheelchair under because I was unable to store it in my home. They would let the dog out on the deck where she would use the bathroom. One day, I was heading off to class and my chair was saturated in dog piss. After I explained what happened, they still continued to let the dog do her business on the deck because they're the most ignorant people I know. Another time, I come home late and there was trash juice all over the steps and down the hallway that I had to scoot through to get to my room. That night, my boyfriend at the time left a note in big bold letters on the fridge that read, "Clean up the trash juice in the hall." They started an argument saying, "You didn't have to put it that way and write it in all caps." That's literally what they wanted to argue about. My ex-best friend had super long hair and it was everywhere in the bathroom. I asked her repeatedly to clean the hair out of the tub every time she showered. I had to explain to her that I do not have a shower chair and I do not stand in the shower, so if you don't clean it, your hair sticks to me. Halfway through the year, one of them lost their job and would not pay their share of gas and electric and internet. When we would pay the rent, they would throw away the receipts even though I managed all the finances. At some point, my ex-best friend's mother was staying with us completely free for the last 4 months I lived there, and she slept in the guest bedroom where I had a spare single bed. The day I packed up to move, her and her mother argued I was a shitty person because I was taking a place to sleep right out from underneath of the mom. Like I wasn't going to take all my things when I moved. When I tried to discuss it reasonably like an adult, they would childishly ignore me or walk away. So I packed everything and got the hell out. They never paid for their share of the security deposit, and I never got it back because they fucked up the house by being general slobs and the dog ruined the deck. I had a few roommates when I was living in the dorms my freshman year of college. They were good people all in all, and we had some good times, but as with just about every college experience for most of us, there was one guy who liked to drink a lot. One night I came home at like 3 in the morning to find our drunk roommate just standing over one of our other roommates' beds, staring at him awkwardly in this odd, Walking Dead looking stupor. I could tell he was plastered because he was kinda rocking around in silence in the dark. Honestly, it was a bit creepy, so I called out to him in a whisper, "Mike?" He turned his head towards me relatively quickly, head bobbing all around, and slowly raised his finger in front of his mouth, and quietly shushed me like fucking Elmer Fudd hunting rabbits. He held his finger there for another few seconds and nearly incoherently muttered, "Fuck this guy." If you could permit me to quickly paint a picture of what Mike looked like and what Rob looked like, you'll understand why this was a really huge problem. They were as polar opposite as you could imagine, in just about every capacity. Mike was a surfer from Los Angeles, shorter, skinnier kid with long hair and a stoner attitude. Rob, on the other hand, grew up on a farm and was substantially larger and substantially more fit than Mike, and he never fucked around. Dude was serious. Always. Now, Mike must have already had it out without me noticing because he was primed and ready to fire without me even realizing what was going on. All I heard was the sound of water hitting cloth, and that's when I saw it. He had started to pee on Rob, who up until that moment was fast asleep. Rob, waking up to what he thought was just warm water, quickly realized what was happening and proceeded to jump out of the bed and grabbed Mike, who was still peeing on him up until this point, and threw him across the room off the far wall. He looked like a fucking rag doll bouncing off the wall, hitting the desk below and then onto the ground. Mike didn't say a word. He stood up, quietly tucked himself in, and proceeded to walk right past Rob and climb back into his bed. Rob looked at me, looked at our other roommate who was now awake behind me, and looked back at Mike. All of us had this dumbfounded look on our face except Mike, who was, of course, within seconds, already starting to quietly snore. I honestly will never forget the sight of Rob standing there in the middle of the room with urine dripping down his face, off his shoulders, and down his arms, with this absolutely befuddled look on his face as he tried to process what the fuck just happened. I think it angered him more to hear Mike snoring because he angrily turned to his bed and tried to wake him up by shaking him, violently at first, and then hitting him in his back, arms, and head. Nothing. Mike was out cold. The rest of the year went as you can imagine. It was an experience. This happened last week, so it's fresh in my mind. I have a housemate that has lived in the house I am sharing for a good 7 years or something. Edit. This is the length of time that she has lived in the house. I've only moved in recently. She's outlasted countless other housemates during this time. When I agreed to rent the room, I got a super weird vibe from her, but decided to rent it anyway as college started the following week and I was desperate to find a place. Anyway, to quickly set the scene, she has always acted incredibly entitled throughout the time I've lived here, and she acts like she owns the place. She doesn't, and neither does her family. Her stuff is everywhere throughout the place. Her parents and grandparents regularly come over without warning, and she sits out watching TV every evening, denying me and my other housemate the opportunity to use it, to name only a few of her antics. Last week I had been working on an assignment and went to cook later than I usually would at about 8 or 8:30 p.m. She usually cooks for hours most nights from this point onwards to meal prep. She eats a lot of food. Although we have no verbal agreement that she has exclusive rights to the kitchen from this point onwards. Knowing this, I knew that I had to start cooking ASAP before she took over the kitchen and I wouldn't be able to eat. I got out my frying pan and placed it on one of the 4 stovetops. As I did so, she looks at me and booms, "Excuse me, but I'm about to start cooking now." I'm pretty sick of her antics, so I look her dead in the eye and say, "Are you seriously suggesting that I can't use one of the 4 stovetops to cook dinner in our shared home?" After a long pause and some huffing and puffing, she says, "Well, I'm using the big burner, as I'm cooking pasta." So was I, but beyond being amusing, this didn't bother me as there is an identically sized burner on the other side. She just wanted to claim ownership of the spot I had put my pan on. So I proceeded to cook my dinner. The whole time she acted like it was the rudest thing in the world for me to expect to be able to cook dinner that night. Throughout the 25 minutes it took me to cook my meal, she continued to verbally sigh and tap away at her phone while glaring at me, undoubtedly complaining about me to her parents or something. To make the situation even more ridiculous, she didn't talk to me the next day and ignored me. Such a weirdo. End of this semester can't come quickly enough as I plan to move out ASAP. My roommate in college and a couple of years afterward was named Victor. He was a phenomenally nice guy, and I really couldn't have asked for a better person with whom to share space. He was prompt with his rent, clean, polite, and only too willing to help when bizarre situations cropped up, but every so often a peculiar habit of his would manifest. The first time that I fell victim to this oddity was on a Wednesday night. I had just returned from a club that I occasionally frequented, and I was feeling rather more exhausted than I had anticipated. After trudging into my room and clumsily turning off the light, I flopped myself down on my bed, not even bothering to disrobe, and immediately fell asleep. Mere moments later, I was jarred awake by the sound of a terrifying scream. "Ah!" came Victor's voice, only barely muffled by the wall. It had been high, loud, and seemingly desperate, prompting my sleep-addled mind to race into overdrive. Should I rush over and see if he needed help? Should I just ignore the shriek and go back to sleep? I was halfway out of bed before I heard more noise coming from the other room, and as near as I could tell, the hollering included lyrics. Victor would belt out one line, then repeat it in a higher note as though imitating a shouting crowd. Like New Orleans, New Orleans, Detroit City, Detroit City, Dallas, Dallas, Pittsburgh, PA, Pittsburgh, PA, New York City, New York City, Kansas City, Kansas City, Atlanta, Atlanta, Chicago, and LA! Immediately following that recital, which was an excerpt from James Brown's Living in America, I heard Victor's voice sing along to the horn section, which included an explosive high note. Da! Over the next hour or so, I learned firsthand that Victor occasionally liked to play the same 15 seconds of a song over and over and over and over again. He was kind enough to do this while wearing headphones, but he was apparently so passionate about the music that he felt compelled to sing along. As such, I was treated to the breakdown for Living in America something like 200 times that evening before I finally managed to get back to sleep. A couple weeks later, Victor became obsessed with the main run from the final countdown. I'm a tolerant guy and I'm pretty easygoing. Still, I had to be up at 4 a.m. the following morning, and that just wasn't going to happen with my roommate screaming "do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do" over and over. I went over, knocked on his door, and politely asked him to keep things down for the night. The poor fellow looked so embarrassed that I felt mortified on his behalf. TLDR, my otherwise perfect roommate developed an obsession with screaming. I have many stories of my college roommates, but the one that stands out the most was the shower incident. My girlfriend and I were renting a house with a female friend who liked to play fast and loose with the term hygiene. From this point on, she'll be known as the barista. We were fairly accustomed to the less than ideal odors that would waft gently around the barista, such as when she adopted a diet consisting entirely of hard-boiled eggs, or the nutmeg incident. The house we were sharing was built in the 1960s, and we had separate bathrooms. The barista's bathroom was generally heinous in both smell and appearance, with used tampons and other feminine detritus scattered around. As a result, it took a while to realize that the smell of raw sewage belching forth from her side of the house was not, in fact, her fault. One day, my girlfriend and I were watching TV while the barista was at work, and we heard an ominous gurgling noise from her bathroom. Shortly thereafter, we were assaulted by the smell of raw sewage that was so strong it caused my girlfriend, at the time an autopsy technician, to literally dry heave. Clearly, an investigation had to be mounted, so we made the perilous journey into the barista's bathroom, stepping cautiously to avoid the used condoms and other keepsakes in her biohazard collection. When we arrived, we discovered that raw, chunky sewage was liberally bubbling up from the drain in the barista's shower, which was so coated in pubic hair mold and stains, it looked like a modern art masterpiece. The smell was horrific, and we immediately called the landlady. When the barista returned home from her shift, she was horrified that the lawn had been torn up to expose the shitty Orangeburg sewer pipes that had nearly entirely been blocked by tree roots. Since the barista's bathroom was closest to the sewer main, the backups had been bubbling up in her bathroom for months without the rest of the house being aware. We asked her if she had noticed the issue, and she mentioned that sewage regularly bubbled up from the drain while she was showering, bi-weekly. Her response? "I just squish it back down with my feet." That's when she got a new nickname. Waffle Stomp. Waffle Stomp and her moronic family gave us many stories in the year and a half we lived together, and she also introduced us to our second shitty roommate, statutory rape, neo-Nazi. I can share more if people are interested. There's a very good chance that my roommate will see this, but to be honest, I don't care. First, I'll admit that he's a very quiet fellow, which I appreciate. I've never known him to throw raucous parties or make much noise, and there's never been a time where I've had to ask him about turning down his music or whatever else. He mainly keeps to himself too, which means that I don't have to spend much time talking to him. It's when I do talk to him, though, that all of his problems start to become evident. For one thing, the guy is completely lacking in any sort of social skills. There have been times, on more occasions than I care to count, that I've voiced some complaint or other, and he has just stared back at me with a blank expression. It's gotten to the point where I don't even bother asking him for help with anything, because chances are that he'll wander off in the middle of my request. He never makes any effort to help with cooking or cleaning. He leaves his belongings in random places throughout our apartment, and the times that I've come home to find him hanging around naked number in the hundreds. That last point is made so much worse by the fact that he's incredibly hairy. I have quite honestly found his hair in my food before, and I don't even want to think about which area of his body it came from. Particularly because his hygiene habits are so subpar. I once caught him licking his hands and dragging them over his face in order to clean bits of food from his beard, and I know for a fact that he didn't shower that night. All of this pales in comparison to the worst thing about him, though. Not only does my roommate keep a thoroughly bizarre sleep schedule, staying awake in the middle of the night, sleeping during the day, and then unexpectedly switching that routine, but he has also started inviting himself into my room and onto my bed whenever he feels like it. Just the other night, I was jarred awake by a sudden jostling, and I saw the guy sitting only a few inches away from my face. I thought about kicking him out, but he's just too damn cute. TLDR, my roommate is a hairy, socially awkward nudist. For those of you tuning in at home, this comment included an image. Said image is of a very adorable bunny rabbit. You got me, Reddit. Congrats. One of my former roommates in college bought a $700 TV, a $200 Blu-ray player, $120 speakers, and a metric fuckton of snacks for his side of the dorm. He bought all of this with the inheritance money he received from his grandfather's passing. But it's his money and he can do what he wants with it. Okay. But he bought all this within the first 2 weeks of living there. Long story short, he had to sell or return the TV, speakers, Blu-ray player, and most of his belongings to support his tuition. And so that he wouldn't starve once his endless food supply ran out. Overall, he wasn't the worst roommate ever. I've had plenty worse. But what really rubbed me the wrong way was when I was alone one night. There was a blackout in our dorm. I was hanging out in the hall talking to the freshmen. I was a junior at the time, and we were all shooting the shit. One guy pipes up and says, "You're blank's roommate, right? You like Final Fantasy VII? I love it." That comment seemed odd, so I asked him how he knew I loved FF7. "Oh, your roommate almost sold me your copy you had on your shelf for $10. This was a mint condition, black label copy of the game, which thankfully I still have. It's a rare edition and I spent good money on it. The dude was really cool about it though, figured out that my roommate hadn't cleared it with me to sell the game and declined. The guy knew this inherently too because my roommate had built up a less than charming reputation with the girls on campus and he was known as a sneaky fuck to the guys. TLDR had a roommate who used his dead grandfather's money to buy excessive stuff for our dorm room. Ended up selling most of his belongings and almost sold my mint copy of Final Fantasy VII that I had on display. I used to live with 3 other girls. I got along with one of them really well, but the other 2 were casual friends at best. I know most people like to say that they're the one who does the dishes the most, but generally it was me who took care of it. I did them about twice a week because they just piled up every couple of days and nobody would touch them. No big deal, I figured that everybody has different rates for when they want to do dishes. And if my roommates only wanted them washed once a week or so, then I was the odd man out for wanting them cleaned twice a week. So I usually just ended up doing it myself. I didn't mind. We had a lot of other little conflicts over the semester, but I always kind of prided ourselves on the fact that we never had a quarrel about dishes. Fast forward a year. I'm living with some new roommates who are friends friends with the old ones. I'm telling them about the dishes and how I felt that if somebody in the apartment wants a certain chore done a certain way, they should do it themselves and not expect everyone else to cater to their need if nobody else cares about it. One of them gets a weird look on their face, and I ask what's up. She says, "Those girls said you never did the dishes. They said you let them sit in the sink for 3 days without cleaning them." Turns out that the girls in the apartment really wanted the dishes done every day, but they were too passive-aggressive to actually talk to each other about it. So they just let them sit in the sink for 3 days until somebody cracked and did them as punishment. It was absurd. You're a 20-year-old woman and you can't talk to your roommates about some dishes? Not so much a nightmare roommate, but I had a ridiculously sheltered and possibly OCD freshman year roommate. In our dorm, the most popular layout of furniture to maximize the space in the room without bunking the beds was putting them in an L shape so that one was against the wall and the window, leaving a nice area of open space to hang out in the center of the room. Her mother decided we were not allowed to do this because one of us might roll over in our sleep and fall out the window to our demise 10 floors below. Mind you, the window was 2 feet above the level of the bed and bolted shut. Every night before we went to sleep, Rumi would lock the door, turn the handle to the right, pull on the door 3 times, turn left, pull 3 times, turn right again, and pull 3 times. Every single night. One day, I had just taken out the trash and shortly after thrown out some scrap paper in the bin next to our sink. Rumi went to brush her teeth and accidentally knocked her toothbrush into said bin. Rumi then proceeds to call her mother to ask whether she should wash off her toothbrush and use it or throw it away and buy a new one. She and her mother discussed the topic for about 10 minutes, with Rumi describing the contents of the bin and exactly how long the toothbrush spent in there. Mom apparently then transfers the call to Rumi's dad, and the conversation repeats. After discussing the matter at length, it was decided that Rumi should buy a new toothbrush. Nice girl, felt bad for her. Hope she was able to branch out a bit. Not me, but my cousin had a roommate her freshman year of college that had to listen to Harry Potter Book 1 on tape every single night to fall asleep. My cousin bought her headphones, but she refused to wear them because they hurt her ears. She would play it on a portable speaker loud enough to keep my cousin awake all night. The worst part, she wouldn't even start the tape where she left off the previous night. She would play the beginning every night over and over again. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive. It gets worse. Turns out the roommate wasn't even a fan of the series, had never watched any of the movies or read any other books, didn't know any characters, and as far as my cousin knows, she never even finished the first book because she'd fall asleep every time she started it. Had a roommate freshman year in a shared room who was training for a bodybuilding competition. He would wake up at 5, make a ton of noise, go for a run, come back at 6, go to the gym, come back and pose in front of the mirror, sometimes in the nude, all while I was clearly awake. He would also go to bed at 8 p.m. and get pissed if any noise was made. The clicking of the keys on my phone once set him off because he needed his beauty rest. I caught my college roommate masturbating more than 3 times. In the first semester, he transferred. I also had a roommate who was excessively green, meaning he would sort through our recycling and trash and then hold house meetings to explain why certain types of things were going in the wrong container. I learned a lot about recycling, but it kind of got to be too much. Also, quite a few too many roommates prefer to have their dishes soak when we have a perfectly good dishwasher. One of my roommates was a real slob. We got on his ass about messes in the kitchen, but there wasn't much we could do about his room. Anyways, one night we woke up to his yells, and when I opened his door, a raccoon ran out of his room, which my other roommate shot and killed. My dirty-ass roommate fell asleep with his window open, and a raccoon ended up coming in and eating random shit strewn about his room.